It's Wednesday. It's hump day. And that means it's Trump Day. It really is the happiest music of the week as far as I'm concerned. With me is Dr. Andrew Phillips, Associate Professor in the School of Government and International Relations at the University of Queensland. Hello.
Pleasure to be with you, Kelly.
All right. It's been another big one.
Always.
After 40-plus tweets saying there was no collusion between his campaign and foreign powers, something has altered. Dr. Andrew Phillips, something changed. Donald Trump has conceded that his eldest son, Donald Jr., was at a meeting at Trump Tower in early June. And his tweet said that the purpose of that June 9 gathering at Trump Tower was, to start quotes, to get information on an opponent totally legal and done all the time in politics, and it went nowhere. I did not know about it, close quotes. So there's an admittance that the meeting was to obtain information from the Russians about Hillary Clinton. Okay, that's a bit of a game changer. Is it or not?
It's quite a remarkable admission, and I think it is a really good indication of the reasons that Trump's lawyers do not sleep well at night. In that there's just so much to digest in this tweet. And I think it's worthwhile us keeping in mind, these are official statements from the President of the United States.
They certainly are.
So to the horror of Western civilization, they will be recorded and archived forever for subsequent generations of historians to analyse. But there is so much going on here. Let's start with, we really saw a bit of foreshadowing last week with Rudy Giuliani saying, well, collusion is not a crime.
Yes, collusion is a word that doesn't appear in the Constitution, in constitutional law, all those sorts of things.
That's right.
Yeah.
So this is really a delicious distillation in Twitter digestible form of that sentiment.
Did you have to rehearse delicious distillation?
No, just came
well
to
done
me.
you.
I'm sure that I was going to say I'm channeling Donald, but that's
I didn't even say it right then.
unlikely.
I heard you say it.
Well, the thing is that what is fascinating about this is that collusion's not the issue, conspiracy is. And there are so many avenues for Mueller that have been opened up by this tweet. Now, to take one example, this was a meeting to get information on an opponent, totally legal and done all the time in politics. That might be the case, but there are campaign finance laws that specifically forbid accepting money or, quote unquote, a thing of value from foreign nationals. Now, presumably, the dirt on Hillary Clinton that was being promised in this meeting, which is pretty much conceded by the tweet, would fall under the head of a thing of value. Keep in mind, and this is to give you a sense of this, this is a country, the United States, that is, or historically was so scared about foreign interference in their domestic political processes that they explicitly baked into their constitution a rule forbidding people who were born elsewhere from becoming president. It's the only thing that saved us from President Schwarzenegger. So this is a country that is very much built around, quite naturally, an aversion to possible foreign interference. Now, what we have here is as clear as an admission as you will possibly get of saying, yes, we came to the meeting, we were hoping to get dirt, the dirt wasn't there, disappointing, and it went nowhere.
So would this come back to what is then a thing of value?
Yes.
In these laws, that does thing mean an object? Does it mean money? Does it mean something physical?
That's right.
Or is a thing in itself information?
That's it. And so this is where there is always going to be, at the moment at least, the room for ambiguity of saying, well, we came there was the possibility of information, it didn't materialise, therefore it's not a problem. Now,
geez, it's a brave person who argues now that that information isn't valuable.
That's right.
And it's a thing of value.
And particularly given that we had Donald Trump at rallies saying, well, the Russians have stolen some of Hillary's emails. Let's see if they can go and get some more. So we've got him on record essentially as publicly inciting behaviour that looks like it also materialised at this meeting. But it gets better. Now, here's another element, another angle. If they were seeking the information that was illicitly acquired by the Russian intelligence agents that Mueller has already indicted, then there's a possibility that it would make them accessories after the fact under the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. So if there are any one of a number of angles that you can get this, but it gets even better. I mean, this is why it's like kind of got excited before the delicious distillation is that you've got so much going on here because all of the behaviour around it of Donald Trump asking former FBI Director Comey to pledge loyalty to him, the insistent calls for Attorney General Jeff Sessions to call off the investigation. If this spins out of control, there is possibility the angle there of obstruction of justice as well.
It's really interesting because I was reading an article yesterday that was written by, and I cannot remember his name, so my apologies, but it was the second person who turned down the opportunity in the Nixon years of firing the gentleman who was running the investigation into Nixon. The first Attorney General said, nope, I won't do it, resigned and left. This gentleman was then, took up the post and wouldn't do it, resigned and left. And he was saying that he is seeing the same sort of patterns happening with this investigation, with the behaviour of the president as he saw with Nixon, and he's forecasting not a happy ending. Now, whether that comes to be or not is yet to be seen. But it was interesting watching somebody from who played a role in history in what happened with Nixon, then looking at what's happening now and saying, "Oh, gee whiz, some of the parallels here are a little bit disturbing."
I think that's right. And the parallels are so striking because, I mean, obviously the essence of the Watergate scandal was that the cover-up was in many ways worse than the original crime. And what we're already seeing with Donald Trump, like even in this wonderful tweet, is evidence of a cover-up. Simply in the fact that this tweet contradicts, as you mentioned at the start, there's 40 tweets saying no collusion. Now we've got, well, collusion's not a big deal. The other issue
He doesn't see this as collusion, though. Somewhere, be it a legal tactic or just be it the president having his own opinions on what collusion is and isn't, he doesn't believe it's collusion.
No, that's right. And I think the issue is also that, as Giuliani with his very loyally evasion last week said, look, we'll point to the crime of collusion.
Yeah.
Artfully dodging the claim that it's very clearly evidence potentially here of conspiracy. I think one of the reasons that this is both fascinating and excruciating to follow is that this will be very difficult to pin things on Donald Trump himself. I think it is telling, just to return to the last line of the tweet, and I feel it's almost this sort of theological exercise in kind of passing through the text, but the last line, I did not know about it.
Oh, yeah. That's a bottom-covering last sentence if there ever was one.
It's I can hear the thump of Donald Jr. being run under the bus already. It's really.
Do you reckon he would? Is he going to throw, his son into it if it saves his own?
I wouldn't want to speculate too negatively about that. No, the sense I get is that if Donald Jr. is at a point of facing serious charges, then given that this is a dynastic organisation. That is going to be very difficult for Donald Trump. He does.
But then he can pardon him.
That's right. He can pardon him. So he's got a number of cards up his sleeve. But certainly I think the indication of this tweet would be that the stress is beginning to get to the administration to a degree.
All right, let's move on to another tweet. Keeping in mind that, as we've said, these are considered official statements by the President of the United States. And it said, LeBron James was just interviewed by the dumbest man on television, Don Lemon. He made LeBron look smart, which isn't easy to do. I like Mike. And, of course, the Mike in that tweet was MJ, the NBA legend that is Michael Jordan. So let's have a listen to the part of the interview that probably got up the president's nose.
For him to use sports to kind of divide us is something I can't sit back and not say nothing.
Would you ever run for office?
Run for office?
Would you ever run? Would you ever be a politician or run for office?
I don't think so.
I'm being serious. If someone tried to recruit a LeBron to run for president, they said, listen, they've got no one. If you don't run, Trump's going to win. Would you run?
Well, in that case, I may.
There we go. That's LeBron James talking to Don Lemon on CNN. But this is not the first time that Donald Trump has attacked sports players or tried to politicise sport. There was the controversy over African American NFL players kneeling during the US anthem. So, what's your interpretation of this as a political move?
Well, I think it casts against the broader backdrop of President Trump has an unfortunate habit of insulting. And there is no way of getting around it neatly, but sports players of colour in particular, and more generally, people in the public eye, African Americans, and criticising them on the basis of low IQ. So there is an element to which one might say, well, this is Trump very clearly, again, trying to appeal to the white nationalist base, particularly in the lead up to the midterm. I would suggest, though, that there is a danger of us overreading the political calculus behind a lot of these tweets, because there seems to be it's difficult to avoid the implication that there is racial animus there at some level. We've got to recognise, though, that the common denominator of Trump's insulting people as stupid, and he insults people of all colours and creeds.
He does. He's an equal opportunity.
He is.
Derogatory tweet.
Yeah, the common denominator is people who criticise him
Yep.
end up having their intelligence insulted. So I think this is what went on here, and I think it's a danger for us to overread the Machiavellian political calculations between, from a rage tweet at 11 o'clock at night.
Well, this is what he had to say about Democratic Representative Maxine Waters from California.
Maxine Waters, a very low IQ individual. You ever see her? You ever see her? We will impeach him. We will impeach the president. But he hasn't done anything wrong. It doesn't matter. We will impeach him. She's a low IQ individual. You can't help it. She really is.
So in the end, nothing happens as a result of this, I would think. And I don't mean for those comments in particular. I just mean his base still love him. Those who hated him still hate him. And those who might be in the middle probably aren't swayed one way or another by that.
That's right. I mean, absolutely. It's about further entrenching the political divide. I mean, it's remarkable that and people talk about the normalisation of the Trump presidency, and we've got to acknowledge that the fact that President Trump is repeatedly holding these rallies in a period where we're only just beginning to get into the midterms lead up, and he's been doing this throughout his entire term in office, that's unusual in and of itself. So it's indicative of a very clear and actually quite clever strategy of trying to harness the culture of celebrity in the United States in order to continuously get his message out there.
And keep the base coming to him to these rallies. I mean, it would make sense if you thought, where am I weakening? Where do they love me? Where I might be weakening? Let's go there, have a chat with those people, do the town hall thing. Preach.
That's right.
Off you go.
And I think that the genius of it as well, which is all too often overlooked, is that the reason that the Trump election was so surprising to everyone is that people said that demography was just going to work against Trump, that there were too many Latino voters that were disinclined towards him, that African Americans wouldn't vote for him, that women wouldn't vote for him, and that in the last case that proved to be incorrect for particularly white women in the United States without a college education. Where he was brilliant was being able to consistently mobilise people who would otherwise not have voted. That's what the rally's about. That's what the tweet's about. That is what the Trump machine generally is about.
Joining me this evening on ABC Radio Brisbane and Queensland, I'm Kelly Higgins-Devine. This is Trump Day, and with me, Dr. Andrew Phillips, Associate Professor in the School of Government and International Relations at UQ. Now, we mentioned last week the big expansion of the US economy, but the jobs are largely being created in Democratic strongholds. So how might that affect elections?
Well, the expectation, and we all recall back in 1992, candidate Clinton winning on the slogan, "It's the economy, stupid." And he was obviously campaigning at that time, a period of great economic downturn. The general consensus amongst a lot of political scientists is that economic issues really count during a period of downturn. But when the economy is booming, you're not necessarily going to get the hip pocket issues being activated as much. So it goes back to your earlier point. Now, why is Trump getting into needless fights with people like LeBron James? Why is he increasingly getting excited and animated about Second Amendment gun control rights? Because he knows that at a time of general economic prosperity, those are the things that are going to really activate and animate voters. And there might also be a sense of, and you're exactly right, the economic growth where it's happening in places like Los Angeles, it's happening in places like Silicon Valley, it's happening in places even like Houston, places that don't vote for him.
Do we know why that those areas in particular are doing very well?
Well, you think, for example, and this was something that came up very much in the very early debates in the administration when you had Steve Bannon, who was Trump's right-hand man for a long time. He was talking about strong restrictions on immigration even at that time. And some of the earliest people that were really upset and animated about that were the tech giants in Silicon Valley, because the reality is, where is the big economic growth happening in the United States at the moment? It's happening in tech, it's happening in service industries, it's happening in areas where you have a lot of migrants being attracted that are highly educated, that typically, and this is obviously with no disrespect to conservative voters, but the trends, at least in the United States, the greater the level of higher education, the more likely you are to vote on the left rather than the right. These are the areas that are experiencing the economic dynamism, and they're not the areas in, for example, rural Pennsylvania, where Trump is really getting a lot of the base mobilised and happening.
Yeah. So does that mean anything to him then? If he wasn't getting the vote in those areas to start off with, if they're Democratic strongholds, then, well, you're never looking to those states. Love me, hate me, I don't care. If it booms, that's nice, but it's not sort of on his radar, so to speak.
I think the difficulty for him, though, is that the broad promise was make America great again. And the broad strategy that he has pursued of saying, well, we'll increase tariffs, we'll push around our trade partners, we'll bring American jobs back to Pennsylvania, we'll bring them back to Pittsburgh, we'll bring them back to these places. That is a promise of prosperity. That is a promise things will improve.
If those people can't see it, that's when the trouble starts?
That's right. And so what you're really focusing on at the moment is you've got to think, well, the economy is a beautiful set of numbers at the moment. Can they carry him through to the midterms? Can they carry him through to 2020? Now, at the moment, he can play the base with issues of race baiting, of issues of cultural polarisation. And in a time where there's that hope that the rising economic tide will eventually lift all boats, then that might work. The next serious downturn that occurs, though, that is going to leave the Make America Great Again slogan looking fairly threadbare.
All right. Speaking of elections, the Democrats wanted to tighten up security ahead of the midterms, but the Republicans defeated their bill to increase security, even though alleged intelligence officials have admitted the Russians will be trying to hack the election. What does this mean? Surely you would be saying, yeah, let's make this as unhackable as we possibly can.
Vladimir Putin must be smiling.
How about a little bit of paper and a pencil like we do it in Australia?
That's right.
Yeah, one bit of paper, one pencil, one vote. That's all you get. And then you're out.
One of the great unsung heroes of our democracy is the Australian Electoral Commission. You've got a strong national body to ensure the integrity and effectiveness of our elections. What you've got in the US, on the other hand, is you've got a range of different administrations for managing the election process that vary very strongly from state to state. So some states have got great election security, but 39 of the 50 states were attacked in some way in the 2016 election.
Yeah.
So there's a real issue there. And the fact is that when you've got people like the Homeland Security Secretary of the Trump administration saying there's a problem.
So why have Republicans successfully opposed this bill?
The argument that they've made is one of essentially financial responsibility. That they've said, look, the money that's already been given out hasn't all been spent. The money that's been given out, there hasn't been a proper accounting of how it's been spent. So we're not in a great mood to extend further financial support to it. The subtext of it, of course, though, is that a lot of this financial reform for the electoral systems, yes, it will be strengthening their security, but it will also be potentially enhancing the ability of people to enrol, and there might be a case in some areas where that will not work to the Republicans' advantage.
So this issue then of election security or electoral integrity has now become a partisan issue.
Yeah, and I think that is actually something that's genuinely frightening that came out of that vote, that you would think that this should be an issue that should really be above politics. When you've got the Director of National Intelligence, when you've got the head of the FBI saying this is a clear and present danger, this is a 24/7 problem, and you've got political division over this as an issue. It's no surprise that we have people turning up to Trump rallies now wearing T-shirts saying, better to be Russian than to be Democrat. I mean, that is a profound shift in the level of division in the United States at the moment.
All right. And one of the other big issues that's been around this week, Iran has felt the president's wrath through heavy sanctions, with more to come later in the year. Could this cause a showdown with the EU?
Yes, it could. And for a very unusual reason. I mean, we were talking about this a couple of weeks ago. The Iran nuclear deal, it wasn't brokered between America and Iran. It was brokered between Iran and the P5 plus Germany. So the P5 being obviously China, Russia, Britain, France. The United States and Germany. Now, the issue is the European Union really wants this deal to stay in place. It's Trump who's pulled out of it, but here's where it gets really interesting and really intricate. The sanctions that Trump is imposing are not only sanctions on Iran, but on foreign entities that do business with Iran.
Yes.
So he's kicking around European companies as a means of getting to Iran and economically isolating Iran. So the immediate European reaction is to say, okay, well, transatlantic relations are already, shall we say, not the best. They're now turning around and saying, this is a deal that we want to preserve. This is a deal that you're undermining. And this is a process of undermining that is now hurting some of our biggest companies. And I think that's the really scary part, is the way that it's actually undermining proper alliance relations between the European Union and the United States.
Could that bite some American companies on the butt as well?
Absolutely. I mean, we're in the context, and this is something that was really interesting that didn't get headlines, is everyone's fixated on Trump's trade wars. Now, he's temporarily stepped back from the precipice with the European Union. We didn't hear any tweets about that. Now, we always hear the tweets when the Donald is being tough. We didn't hear the tweets about stepping back from a trade war with the European Union. That's kind of been put on pause for the time being. But yeah, the reality is all of these issues become entangled. And in a situation where you've got the strategic interests of the European Union and the United States increasingly split over issues like Iran, then there is the risk of retaliatory measures that will be playing out.
All right. Any impact on Australia? Do we do
Possibly.
much trade with Iran?
We don't do a great deal of trade with Iran, and Australian companies as a result are unlikely to be hit directly by these sanctions. Basic reality, though, is that come November, Trump is insisting on hitting Iran with sanctions on its oil. Now, it doesn't matter
What does that do to our oil prices?
Well, that's right. Oil is a globally traded commodity, so it means that will be hurting Brisbane motorists come November. We're already, my understanding is we already are the most hard hit of any capital city in Australia. This is where it will get real for us. Come November, thank the president for your higher petrol prices.
Yeah. Well, and regional Queensland, where sometimes the prices can be utterly ridiculous.
That's right.
They'll be even more utterly ridiculous. All right, let's get to an issue that came up. It's sort of a side issue, really, but Donald Trump made it an issue again. Who kept who waiting? So when the president met Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II on July 13th, he said they had a great time. There was only supposed to be 15 minutes. He was there for an hour. This is what he told a rally in Pennsylvania.
I then go up and meet the Queen, and she is fantastic. We then go up and we have tea. And I didn't know this. It was supposed to last for 15 minutes, but it lasted for like an hour because we got along. We got along.
All right, so the big story has been that Donald Trump kept Queen Elizabeth waiting, that she was seen pointing at her watch and, oh, where was he? All those sorts of things. But apparently not true, Dr. Andrew Phillips.
This is exactly right. There is footage conspicuously doing the rounds on the internet of a seemingly perturbed Her Royal Highness looking at her watch. And yet, if we look at the satellite footage, if we look at the official record, the indication is Donald Trump is expected to arrive at 5 p.m. He arrives somewhere around 5:01 p.m. So
Yep. He's on time.
He's pretty much, I would call that on time. So I think it's an illustration of the fact that as much as people like to continuously harass the president, as much as he attracts a degree of negative reaction himself, one can't always assume that he is completely in the wrong. The interesting coda to this, though, is that he did in fact say at his rallies, well, it wasn't me that kept the Queen waiting, but I was waiting for 15 minutes for the Queen. The official record contradicts that as well. They were pretty much on time together.
They were both on time.
I did hear, though, through very confidential channels, that the corgis were furious.
You don't want angry corgis.
You really don't.
It's just asking for trouble. Dr. Andrew Phillips from UQ, thank you very much.
Thanks again.